In the early 90s, a much smaller version of me stood in my living room with an orange pistol in hand, pointed carefully at the TV. I was shooting wildly at ducks flying across the screen. I can still hear that stupid dog laughing at my misses. Duck Hunt is my first memory engaging with video games. Shortly after, I remember going to the library in elementary school, inserting a giant floppy disk into a now ancient Apple computer, and trying to make it to the end of Oregon Trail. Games were a big part of growing up for me. From the Final Fantasy series to playing Madden, I enjoyed engaging myself in the challenge. As a therapist, I hear a lot of opinions about gaming. Do violent video games make kids violent? The dominant refrain from parents is that my kid spends too much time playing video games. It's making him or her depressed, or isolated, or is the cause of their behavior problems. Today's episode takes a dive into the relationship between gaming and mental health, in a new and maybe unconventional way. The talk of gaming having a negative impact has been well documented. With a lot of folks gaming on a regular basis, including those who make a living doing so, I'm interested in seeing how gaming can have a positive impact on our mental health. My name is Chris Morandi, and this is Old Cove Road.
If I told you what I'm really thinking, you wouldn't listen for long. Yeah, you'd ask me if I'd been drinking. No, I'd tell you you couldn't be more wrong.
While perusing the internet thinking about this topic, I ran into a blog called Katie's Game Corner. The author, Katie Aidley, writes about board games and how building a community around gaming can be great for your mental health. Katie was kind enough to tell me her story. The first question I asked was about her decision to talk about her mental health publicly. It's a big thing. Here's what Katie had to say.
Yeah, of course, it's not something I was always really open about, to be honest. I've kind of dealt with depression and been diagnosed with that like most of my life, and I kind of, to be quite honest, I wasn't in a great place, and I never really spoke about it. I never really kind of opened up to anybody about it. I just got on with my life and thought that was that. And I think when I started my blog, actually, it wasn't ever supposed to be a thing. I wasn't ever supposed to get a following. I wasn't ever supposed to have people read it. It was kind of just a way for me to, I wasn't even writing about mental health as such, but it was just a kind of way for me to vent, or I guess it was therapeutic for me to write about things. I thought, I'd just come out of a really bad breakup. I'm going to write some blog posts. We'll see what happens. Then I'm not saying I'm huge, but I do have people that enjoy reading my blog. And I thought, why not use this platform and why not talk about things that affect me and see if I can help other people as well. But the first blog post I did write about mental health, that was my depression and board games, and how I've kind of used board games and the community to cope with depression. I actually wrote that months ago and was terrified to post it. I edited it about 10 times. I was so kind of worried what people would think of me. And then one day I just thought, you know what, I'm going to do it.
After posting that first piece, Katie began to receive some positive feedback. She also began to get more involved with the board gaming community. I asked Katie about the impact that decision had on her mental health.
Like I said, I've kind of dealt with depression a lot for most of my life, and I wasn't diagnosed for a very long time. And I thought maybe I had it, or obviously something wasn't right, but I just wasn't doing very well. I would drink a lot. I'd go out. I'd socialize with people maybe I shouldn't be socializing with. It was quite a toxic time for me, and I was, instead of trying to help myself get better, I was just kind of self-medicating and doing things that maybe I shouldn't. And I was at a friend's house one day. She played a few board games, and she was, like, do you want to play a game? I was like, not really. No, I don't really want to play. I can't remember. It was about Vikings or something. And I was like, no, that does not interest me whatsoever. And then I started to think about it, and I thought maybe I'll give it a go. So I started playing games, not really realizing that I was going to get so into it and then have a blog and all that kind of stuff. And I just felt quite settled and happy when I was playing games. It was a nice distraction. Instead of going out and getting drunk and doing things I shouldn't, I wanted to spend time with my friends, socializing, playing games, and it just had a really positive impact on me. And mentally, it was nice to use my brain for something new, if that makes sense. Not necessarily a distraction, but just occupying myself and, giving myself a new hobby. And I think that's something that's really important, and it's something I'm writing about at the moment. Is how, if you aren't feeling great, if you do suffer with depression, or if you have got anxiety, or you are dealing with any mental illness, creativity or finding a new hobby can actually be really positive for that.
Katie went on to advocate for board games as a healthy activity that can bring people together and ultimately do wonders for your mental well-being. Perhaps an unintended result of Katie's blogging about board games has been her work to break down the stigma surrounding mental illness within her community. Here's Katie.
Like I said earlier, most people go through this kind of stuff. And just to be able to see that it is normal is really helpful. Because for so long, it's only maybe a couple of years that it started to change. There's always been this stigma around mental health or a mental illness, or that it isn't seen as an actual illness, or that just get over it or cheer up or whatever. And it's never really been taken seriously, but I feel like I'm not necessarily a mental health blogger. So I do talk about primarily board games. So I do talk about mental health and board games and how they're kind of connected for me. But the rise in bloggers as well, our YouTube is huge now, and the amount of YouTubers that deal with anxiety, deal with depression, and are open to talk about it, it can only have a positive effect. From where I'm sitting and from the community that I'm in, it's really starting to shift, and I do even now see more people starting to talk about it and starting to give advice to others as well.
You can find Katie's work at katiesgamecorner.com, on Twitter at katiesgamecorner, and on her new YouTube channel by the same name. If you're enjoying the show so far, don't forget to press that subscribe button on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. Also, leaving a positive review would be great. Before we continue, I just want to take a second to talk about some of the writing being highlighted on oldcoveroad.com. People from all over the world are sharing their thoughts and experiences with mental health and social media. It's definitely worth checking out. And if you have something to say on the topic, reach out on the contact page or on Twitter at oldcoverd. After reading a few articles about gaming ruining teenagers, I ran into a website called anxietygaming.com. Anxiety Gaming is the brainchild of Jason Dockton. The website says Anxiety Gaming is a community-driven effort to provide free mental health care to the gaming community. Okay, this sounds awesome, and I was curious about how an idea like this could come into existence. While the company has certainly grown since the beginning, it all started with Jason.
Many years ago, I was in school, and I was studying biopsychology, and I finished that up and decided to go the psychiatry route. So I enrolled in medical school and was really, pumped to do that. But I was working as an EMT at the time, and I was in a really difficult relationship at the time, and it was just really juggling way too much for me to handle. And one day I was coming home and had a panic attack, and I was just so certain that it was anything but a panic attack. It 100% was some kind of random heart attack for this 21-year-old guy, because that, happens all the time. It completely broke down. The fire department showed up, and it was this huge scene. And it just really stuck with me. And the next day it was harder to go to school. And then the next day I decided to take a day off, and, a day off felt good. So another day off feels even better. And then the next day I just don't have any interest in school, and slowly but surely, I just started that avoidance pattern behavior and then completely disappeared. And it was the most bizarre thing, because I remember waking up one day 3 years after I was supposed to start med school and realizing that I had just not left the house. And I didn't know at the time, but I developed agoraphobia, and it started to take a real nasty turn, because I started to also struggle with obsessive compulsive disorder. I had this idea in my head that all of this anxiety, all of these feelings were due to some allergic reaction, and something that I was eating was causing these allergic reactions. So I stopped eating. I wouldn't eat next to anything. I was just grilled chicken, sometimes ketchup, but everything else I would avoid. I wouldn't touch anything that I thought could contain any kind of allergen. And it was just terrible. Always burning my hands trying to scold off any kind of possible allergen. I just really lost myself in my mental health for many, many years. At some point it just kind of came to the conclusion of I really don't want to live this way. There's really no hope. I've lost contact with all of my friends. I don't know how to get help because I can't even leave the house. So I'm just going to go ahead and end my life. And for whatever reason, it was such a weird thought to think I'm just going to take my own life. I couldn't really fathom it. And what came to mind was this really bizarre justification of, maybe if I save somebody else's life, maybe if I stop somebody else from taking their life, then it makes sense to take my own. There's kind of like this trade-off here where, this person deserves to live, but I'm not going to make it, so let's do that. And, at the time, being home, at this point, 4 or 5 years and not leaving the house, really the only thing that I had was gaming. Played World of Warcraft all day and decided, okay, so every single battleground I go into, every raid, every dungeon, I'm just going to say, hey, if you need someone to talk to, if you're feeling depressed, add me on Battle.net or here's my Skype. And I did this for weeks upon weeks upon weeks and never really got anything back until one day this kid added me on Skype. And, we talked back and forth. And he was in a relationship with somebody that he really loved, and she was going to leave, and he couldn't process the whole situation, and I don't know how to process the situation either. I made sure to biopsychology or not, wasn't really going that route. So but we would talk every single day. And sometimes we talked for an hour or two. Sometimes we talked and one day we talked for 12 hours straight. It was just this constant conversation going over, and we finally came to the conclusion that, hey, if love is worth taking your life over, certainly love is worth living for. And he really appreciated that, and it was the first thing that he really processed, and that solidified it. We talked a couple of times after that, and one day he comes on and he's just like, hey, I'm not thinking about that anymore. I don't want to commit suicide. I want to find the one, and I want to live my life, and I know I can be happy. And it was just this beautiful breakthrough, and we really celebrated that together, and it just felt amazing to help and to be a part of that process. And it was kind of met with this bittersweet reality of, okay, so my job here is done. I did my thing. I saved this guy, and now, I can take my own life. And, I spend a day or two trying to figure out how I'm going to do that. And all of a sudden I get another app on Skype, and it's a friend of this guy's. And he says, hey, you talked to my friend when he was feeling depressed. He said you were really easy to talk to. I want to talk to you, or I was hoping you'd have some time to talk with me. And I figured, I might as well. It's kind of coming to an end here. And so I talked with him, and I hadn't been on World of Warcraft in all this time, because all of my day was spent either talking to this other gentleman or researching the things that I should say to him or how I can help him. Mm-hmm. And when I finally logged on, I realized I had dozens and dozens of people add me.
Oh, wow.
And so I spent weeks and months, years talking to people and trying to help them process how they were feeling. And it went from, how do I commit suicide? How do I commit suicide? It went from that to, how do I help these other people? and it just turned into this incredible journey. And every step of the journey was learning things from experience. Like, okay, talking to people is good, but it can also be kind of dangerous. There's a lot of things that you take on when you do that. What can we do? And it always came down to, you got to get these people to see professionals. You got to see a therapist. And, I helped tons of people find therapists, and, it was the simple, like, all psychology today, your zip code or something like,
right.
This person looks cool. Like, let's do that. And, it started to evolve over time as we get more and more feedback of like, this person looked cool, but I didn't like this about them. And, okay, so let's make that a note. So these things are things and it just started to filter out of, okay, so gender matters, spirituality matters, distance matters. All of these things start playing in. Just conducting all of this internal research to try and refine that system. But then it evolved even beyond that of personality matching and all kinds of different psychometric data that we were pulling together to figure out more and more ways to have a stronger impact there. And I think one of the biggest hitting points for us was when I decided to put myself through the program. I had to find myself a therapist, and that was just, it's a terrible experience. It's unfortunately very complicated, and, when you Google a therapist, you don't necessarily find the best therapist for you. You find the best therapist at marketing themselves.
Yep.
Which a lot of the times is the opposite direction of what you want.
Yeah.
So we found so many different ways to bypass that and better match people. But going through the process myself, I can't afford therapy. I'm not working. I'm a shut-in. How am I going to leave my house to even see a therapist? There were so many different issues that we had to learn to resolve. And so I learned all about disability and getting on SSI and SSDI, all of these different issues, Medicare, Medicaid, how do you tackle these things? And going through that process, I finally figured it out, managed to luck out and have an incredible therapist that helped me overcome my issues, who happened to be on the same block as me, and would still do house visits because I couldn't walk down the street.
Wow, nice.
It was such an incredible process, but it was one that we tackled very aggressively to solve, because the whole system is just terrible. And then when we realized how to work that system is when things really blew up. So one of the biggest things that has helped to create Anxiety Gaming and make it into a legitimate nonprofit is once I finished in therapy, I would take my disability checks and I would use those to pay for other people's therapy. But therapy is ridiculously expensive, so we would start to negotiate with therapists and see if they could see people for less. In return, we would send them full pay clients, and that would be our way of kind of having that relationship. And it just took off.
That's awesome.
We would pay for people's therapy. We would do all kinds of fundraisers to afford people's therapy, and all of a sudden that barrier didn't exist anymore. Nobody could say, I would get better, but I can't afford that luxury. It was always, well, we'll afford it for you. And our experience with doing all of that is what really grew us into something gigantic, because for us, that's just how it has to be, and that's what we're going to try and do with the whole system, is just make mental health care free.
Jason went on to talk about many of the successes Anxiety Gaming has had in reaching those struggling with anxiety and depression, who maybe otherwise wouldn't have gotten the help they needed. He's doing some really great work. I was interested, though, in playing a bit of devil's advocate. I asked Jason his thoughts on gaming promoting violence, making people feel more isolated, and maybe using gaming to avoid talking about some of their negative feelings. Should we be all in on gaming, or should we maybe have a little bit of balance between online life and real life?
Yeah, that's one that has racked my brain for some time. I think on the surface level, that balance comes from not feeling dependent on this, and feeling as if this is a helpful tool versus a necessary tool. But at the same time, one of the things that I've personally been studying and collecting more data on internally is this new approach to socialization. I mean, we are socialized from a young age and throughout our life, and this is something that I've always loved about sociology is studying that very interpersonal socialization as well as that larger scope community socialization. But it's changed now. People are actually socializing digitally versus like when I was in high school, we go and we hang out at the mall or we go out someplace, and that's how we socialize. That's how we bond. That's how we learn together and develop and understand social norms. All of this is taking place online now. Kids are going home, playing Call of Duty, and that's their socialization. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to find the line where that's healthy and unhealthy, because if you, as a parent, maybe listening to this, decide, well, I don't want my kids on their phone too much, and you take the phone away, you've just taken away all of their friends. Mm-hmm. You've taken away their access to social media. They go to school, and they don't know what's happening, but so-and-so just broke up with so-and-so, and that's the latest drama. How could you talk to this person? They're the bad person in this situation. You're just like, I don't know. I wasn't on Facebook yesterday. Right. And it's just like, but that's the repercussion. And so it's hard to find that balance too, because there are realistic repercussions to disconnecting from entertainment in that way and social media. You very much can miss the point of topic. It's not going and hanging out one day at school and talking about the movie you saw at the movie theater. It's talking about what happened on Twitter, what's going on Reddit, Facebook, and all of these others. Did you see so-and-so's Snapchat story? Well, you're never going to see it again because it's gone already. Like, if you miss that, you lose everything. And if you didn't play Call of Duty tonight, or if you didn't jump on Overwatch, you miss all of that stuff with everybody. And I think there's so many opportunities now to socialize that it becomes almost toxic. You can't afford to miss out. You have to delve into everything. So yeah, it's really interesting to watch that socialization process take place online. But in terms of where that balance is, it's getting harder and harder to tell when it would be healthy to cut somebody off.
What are your thoughts on gaming addiction? Is it on par with other things that folks get addicted to, like drugs or food or gambling, those kind of things?
The next step for us is to really do much more hands-on testing, fMRIs, and really getting to see how the body is responding and compare that to someone, for example, who compulsively eats. That's how they manage feelings and emotions. That's how they deal with stress. I think what you would find is a lot of people are doing the same. But I think the important thing to not take from that is that gaming is a problem. I think gaming is a very healthy solution that solves a lot of problems for a lot of people. It's just, again, I think, and I know some of the people that I look up to and study under also agree that addiction is just the nature of being human, that we inevitably will struggle with some kind of vice. We just need to. Life has to have that ultimate distraction in some ways. And, why eating, why drugs, why alcohol, why all of these things that are not only destructive to ourselves but to others, when it can be gaming, which doesn't seem to hurt people, which now seems to be paying paychecks and fostering creativity. We have a BCBA on staff who works exclusively with people that have autism spectrum disorders, and we've just watched gaming be life-changing. Just people with Asperger's who are now learning to socialize and have a better social group that have tons and tons of friends, but if you minus the gaming, would struggle. And it's such a beautiful thing and such a great community overall that it's something too that parents should look at is of all of the things that your child could use to cope with stress, is gaming something that's so bad? This is something that could be a career. This is something that could help them learn and approach and tackle issues. And games seem to tackle everything, political to the theological, to the spiritual, existential questions. It's a great platform to learn, and maybe the onus on the parents is to help their child figure out which games are the right games for them to develop through, rather than trying to police them socializing through games.
For more information on mental health and gaming, check out anxietygaming.com. Links to additional resources can also be found on Old Cove Road's website. There are a few things Jason said that stuck with me. One is that the way people communicate, specifically young folks, is changing. This change is certainly highlighted through the gaming community. I decided to dig into the research to see if anybody's explored the topic. I came across an article by Kirsten Durning, who is interested to find out gaming's effects on our interactions. Here's Kirsten.
During my undergraduate years, I was really interested in Dr. Paul Ekman's work with innate human emotion, specifically microexpressions. So that's kind of where a lot of my research was built off of. But as for gaming, it was definitely more of like a personal interest of mine. Uniquely, though, I jumped from like my Super Nintendo 64, into Xbox 360, so obviously there was a whole bunch of generation gaps with consoles and systems that I missed. So whenever I came back, I found it very interesting how it became more of a social aspect, obviously with online gaming, interaction, headsets. And so for the new social aspect, I found that very intriguing. Since the history of gaming, you start with going back all the way to the arcade, and people used to meet and play and compete to get the highest score and have to take turns on each one of the machines. Then when you got more like, the Super Nintendo 64, you'd have to maybe gather on the weekend with your friends or after school to game. So that's socially active. But then now you have it where it's all virtual. Your friend could be in his bedroom and you're in yours and you're sitting there and you're gaming. So I was curious as to how gaming would be in relationship to psychology and the social interaction that it would come from there. And so that's where I built that from, and then pulled my Ekman interest with the microexpressions and facial expressions into it. And since microexpressions, in order to catch any, you have to have very good reaction time. So that's kind of how those two mesh together to lead into my study.
The premise of Kirsten's study was to find out if gamers were actually better readers of human emotion than non-gamers. Her hypothesis was that because gaming requires a high level of attention to detail, this could translate when interacting with people in real life. As Kirsten talked about, the way she measured this was through identification of microexpressions. Dr. Paul Ekman says that no matter where you are in the world, human beings display 7 universal emotions. They are anger, fear, sadness, disgust, surprise, contempt, and happiness. Microexpressions are defined as the facial expressions that occur within 1/25th of a second. Dr. Ekman contends that they are involuntary and expose a person's true emotions. Kirsten's study is fascinating and explores the potential benefits of playing video games. While her study did not show statistically significant differences between gamers and non-gamers when reading microexpressions, her sample size was small and the topic is definitely worth further exploration. I asked Kirsten where she thought research was headed to further look at ways video games can benefit the mental health community.
For future studies, one thing that I mentioned at the end of my study that I thought would be interesting would be how could this positively impact someone with, for example, autism? Because it could have have a positive effect playing because they can have the storylines, character development, emotional responses, backgrounds, and possibly, it's a big, statement, but impact their ability to process environmental stimuli, both on the emotional aspect and non in general. So I always thought that would be an interesting avenue for myself or someone else to check out. It would just be interesting aspect to look at because I would argue that maybe they're able to pick up on more of like emotional reading and stuff just from gaming or the responses. Because nowadays games are so, I mean, depending on what companion you take for a quest, they may or may not like the decisions you make during your gameplay. Like if you steal something, one character may like it, one character might not. So it has like a positive or negative reaction, emotional reaction from this character you're running around with, depending on what actions you choose.
From exposure-related games to assist those struggling with PTSD, to games for kids to help teach basic healthy emotions like empathy, games can be a great medium for learning, being involved in a community, and sharpening social skills. It's not all about good or bad. Like everything else, it's about moderation and being mindful of the activity you're engaged in.